Hello, I just wanted to record a quick intro video. So I had the opportunity to recently interview Scott Driskell. Scott Driskell is the Assistant Activities Director and Athletic Director at Creston High School. He's also the Assistant Principal. He provided me with a great deal of knowledge with some of the sport ethics dilemmas that he's faced throughout his career. He actually started working at Creston at his full-time position during COVID. So that was really interesting to hear some of his insights about how we went about the COVID pandemic and how we went about scheduling athletics and all that sort of thing. So I think that he provided me a great deal of knowledge that I will be able to use as I move forward in my career. Thank you and enjoy the interview. Have a great day.
You're welcome.
So kind of what's your summary of your career?
So I started, this is my 28th year. I started as a high school social studies teacher in a small school called East Union in Southwest Iowa and coached about everything and knew that down the line I wanted to get into administration. So from there I went to Earlham, was a head high school football coach and kind of got into guidance counseling and dean of students work there. When I got my master's, enjoyed my time there, got a coach, had a couple children, and decided at that time I grew up in Creston, where I'm currently at. And at that time, there was an administrative opening there. And so we kind of moved our family back here, and I've been here now 13 years. Started as an assistant principal at the elementary, then moved into the principal role for 6 years there. And then this is my fifth year. I moved to the high school as the assistant high school principal and activities director. And to be honest, I got into this business in administration. My high school activities director was a huge influence on me. So it's kind of ironic that I sit in the office that he had when I was in high school. So it's kind of a full circle type thing. But that's been a career path. Like I said, I've been 5 years now at Creston as the assistant principal and activities director, and I enjoy it very much.
Thank you for answering the question. So another question I have is what philosophies or quotes do you live by or morals, I guess? Are there any
Philosophy or
philosophies or quotes that you
morals
live
that I
by?
live by, for me, it's valuing every student, both as an assistant principal. My main role as the assistant principal is dealing with student discipline, and then as the activities director. So today I'm struggling a little bit because while we're able to get our high school activities in tonight, we had to cancel. So for instance, basketball is going to Carroll to play Kemper Catholic. But because of weather and temperature concerns, etc., we're just playing varsity only. So we're just doing boys and girls to make sure we get our conference games in. I struggle with that because to me, the freshman and the JV games matter just as much as the high school games. And that ties right into my philosophy that every kid matters. Every game matters, every student matters. I'm kind of wrestling with myself today, but at the same time, you're forced to make decisions. We knew that it was going to be a lot to get everybody, all those games in and get people, our folks wouldn't be getting home until almost midnight or 11:30 with wind chills. And so we were able to bump up start times to 4:30 and 6 and get our folks home. So sometimes you trade off what you feel is really important for the safety of others. And so that's kind of that ties into with the question about dilemmas and tough decisions that we face. Today was a tough one, trying to decide, okay, are we going to have activities knowing that we don't have school? And then what does that look like, trying to value all of our students? And so that's where we settled. But overall philosophy is valuing all of our students and knowing that every kid has worth, whether they're the all-state player that's going to go to college and play athletics, or the kid that isn't going to play much. They mean just as much to that team as anybody. So trying to value everybody's role and who they are as a human is my number one philosophy.
Awesome. So are there any other ethical dilemmas that you faced in your career that have kind of stood out, and
Well, yeah, I
how's
mean,
company
obviously,
policy how's company policy kind of handled that?
yeah. My first year here would have also been that spring was COVID. So I'm trying to, our first year as activities director, I should say. So I'm trying to balance my learning curve as far as all of the things that come with being an assistant principal and activities director, and then suddenly we're shut down, and so that was a huge learning curve. And then really coming out of COVID that summer when we were allowed to start having baseball and softball games, but restricted attendance. Each player, well, actually, it started that winter. Each player could only, for basketball and wrestling, each player could only have two people attend, and and they had to wear masks, and in a politically charged environment where people didn't believe in masks and people did, we had to enforce the mask or we weren't going to be able to have that. So our policy dictated enforcing the masks and restricted attendance and spacing and those things. And that was really difficult because people, one, were anxious to get back to a normal life and get to activities and get to watching their kids and their grandkids perform. But then they had all these restrictions placed on them. And then that forced us to kind of, we had to be the heavy in that, where if you're not going to wear a mask, then I got to ask you to leave. And that led to some difficult discussions with people, some who didn't want to hear a word we say, and many who did comply, but that was a huge learning curve for me, seeing that here's what the rules are that we have to follow in order to host these contests, but our people feel different here. So managing both of those things, but also trying to be respectful of people. And ultimately, our statement to our fans was, if you want to watch your kids play volleyball, basketball, wrestle, whatever, we've got to follow the rules. If you don't want to follow the rules, then our choice is you can leave, or we'll have to cancel the game. I mean, it just became that simple. And so that was a challenging time, and a weird time, just because I still hadn't fully got my feet on the ground as an activities director. But we learned a lot from it, and it set me up certainly for any discussions I've had in the 4 years since then.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was kind of tough for you to learn all the company policy, especially with all the changing restrictions and everything during that time.
Yeah, it was, and you're right that the restrictions changed, and then you'd hear rumors, and again, it did make it challenging, but most people, 95% or more of the people, knew whether they agreed with it or not, if that's what it took to watch their kids play, then that's what they were doing.
Yeah, so your decision-making process was kind of just making sure that everyone stayed safe and making sure that you did the
Yeah.
least amount of harm and making sure that everyone stayed safe and you couldn't,
Yep. Yep.
one couldn't
Follow the
file a lawsuit
policies.
saying like you couldn't, like you didn't make them wear masks or whatever. So
Right, right. Well, it was follow the policies and do all we could. Again, it goes back to the kids, doing all we can to make sure that the kids got to play their games, right? It's about respecting the kids and making sure that our adults and parents knew that if they didn't follow our rules, the kids may not get a play, and none of us want that.
yeah. All right, thank you. I think that's all the questions I have.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
If you need anything else, don't be afraid to holler at me.
All right, thank you so much. I
All right, have a
appreciate it.
great day.
Stay warm.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah,
Mm,
thank you. All right. Have a great day.
you
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
So I decided to answer the question about the department morals first for the questions that were on the rubric. So I decided to talk about respect and how we're supposed to try and value other people's opinions and property in ethical situations. When thinking about the situations that Scott went through, he mentioned having to move up the basketball game times to ensure that they got the games in. He I think he tried to respect the opinions of people as much as he could. I'm sure he had assistance in deciding whether or not to move the game times up, and that was hard for him to move them up for because he didn't know if the JV was going to be able to play. So I'm sure that was hard for him, but he had to respect and value other people's opinions, and it was very important for him to do that in that situation. And he respected other people by ensuring that they got home safe because of the snowstorm that was coming. And then in terms of COVID, I'm sure he discussed it was really hard for him to um, deal with that because some of the parents didn't want to wear a mask, but I think likely tried to respect the opinions of others. And but again, you have to follow the ethical codes or guidelines that are given to you. So I think that the department moral, of respect in this situation would be critical to consider. So for this portion of the video, I was supposed to answer some of the questions after the interview was completed. So when looking at Scott's situation, he kind of explained how even that day that I interviewed him, they didn't have school because of snow and inclement weather. So he had to make an ethical decision of whether or not to cancel some of the activities or which activities he was going to cancel based on the weather because they didn't have school that day. So one of the things I noticed was he had to define the problem. So the problem was whether or not they were going to have any of the activities at all. And he also had to decide, okay, if we're going to have activities, which activities are we going to move up compared to move down or like cancel altogether based on the time of the activity. So as he mentioned, like he wanted to ensure that the varsity games got in, so they moved the time up of those. In the JV, they moved the time back. That way they had the varsity game in so that if the weather got too bad that the parents and everyone would be able to get home safely. You know, he had to think about that ethically. He also had to probably get support from his staff and, look at the weather radar and say, okay, so when is the snow coming? When is the inclement weather coming? How do we make sure that people are able to get home safely and everything? He also had to look at alternative solutions, okay, if we cancel the game here, what would there be a specific day, that we could reschedule, that sort of thing. But he ultimately made the decision to make sure that um, he made sure that the varsity game was played before the JV game and that sort of thing. And then evaluating the decision, obviously, he wanted to make sure that everyone got home safe. So he made the right decision by making sure that the varsity game got played first. As he said, it hurt him dearly because he values each student and each athlete, regardless of whether they're on JV or varsity. So I thought that was a pretty cool um, ethical scenario that he had to deal with. That was pretty cool that he had to do it on that same day too. Um, Obviously, he'd be looking at it through the utilitarian approach, saying, how can I make sure that I'm doing the least amount of harm, but also the most good, which it's kind of hard to think of it that way based on, you know, he's choosing to play the varsity kids first, regardless, you know, the JV, they might not get a play, but ultimately for the safety of everyone involved, it would be best to get the varsity game in, and he was doing the least amount of harm possible, but making sure that all the parents got home safely with their children after the event because of the snowstorm that was predicted to come. He also talked about COVID. So COVID, he started during COVID, and there was a time where, there was masks and policies and everything. And some of his policies, he would basically tell parents like, hey, like you got to wear a mask, otherwise we're going to have to cancel the event. He said that was hard for him because number one, it was his first year on the job, so I'm sure that wasn't easy at all, especially considering that he had to deal with COVID. And a lot of the parents, some of the parents, they didn't want to deal with all of those guidelines, but he basically laid it out for him. Like he's like, you either wear a mask, or we're not gonna, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave, or if not, we're going to have to cancel the game. So I think that was kind of hard for him to deal with. And like, he had to weigh that out. Like, okay, how do I make sure I provide a safe environment for everyone, but also have the sporting events go on? And how do I make sure I'm following company and state policy? So he mentioned that some of the parents could only have two, some of the students could only have two parents. So that limited capacity, which I'm sure that was hard for him to do. But in reality, he had to make sure that there was enough space in the gym for everyone to be socially distanced. And he had to make sure they had masks on as well. So again, the utilitarian approach, making sure that he would do the least amount of harm by making sure that, he would provide a safe environment for everyone to be in. And then also looking at the virtue approach, he'd be like, okay, so if I move forward with this decision, how is that going to affect how I view myself as a person? I think that he ultimately made the right decision for both of those scenarios. It's a tough choice. There's going to be some tough decisions you have to make in your sporting career, but it's always looking at, okay, how do I make sure I provide the least amount of harm possible? How do I advance the common good? So the common good was for everyone, you know, making sure that they were still able to have events. If they didn't have masks, they wouldn't be able to have events. And if he didn't, if he had to choose, okay, am I going to have varsity or JV first? Choosing varsity advanced the common good because it allowed the varsity team to get their game in prior to the JV game. So then everyone was able to get home safely. So looking at those through the 7-step plus decision making model and looking at this decision through some of the approaches, I think it's amazing how I can learn so much knowledge based on those two scenarios in the interview. Like I got to learn a real world example of how to use those approaches and the 7-step plus ethical decision making model. So I think that this assignment provided me with a great deal of knowledge, even though I might not face an ethical scenario like that during COVID again. It might be beneficial for me down the road because we don't know when a pandemic is going to come. We don't know when a storm is going to come, that sort of thing. So I think this project provided me with a great deal of insight, and I appreciate Scott's willingness to talk with me and share some of his ethical dilemmas he's faced throughout his career. I hope that I answered all the questions, and I agree with, like I said, I agree with some of the decisions that he made. I think they were the right decisions, and considering how to keep everyone safe would be of the utmost importance. I just want to thank you for listening to my video, and I appreciate your feedback as you grade this assignment. Thank you. Have a great day.